Harvard Divinity School.
Uses and abuses of power in alternative spiritualities. Implications for spiritual care of patients and communities. April 27th, 2023.
Today's presentation is on the 10 ox herding pictures. This is an abbreviated presentation. It usually is 75 to 90 minutes. I do these in class when we study Buddhism. I've done them in secular settings, in churches and synagogues, because they're really powerful representations of the internal journey. And often today, we don't have language for the internal journey. So this is one way of finding that language. The pictures have poetry with each frame, and we don't really have time to do the poetry, so I will elaborate on each frame, and if anybody wants to discuss any of the frames or ideas during the question period, we'll have that opportunity. I used frames from different time periods. You find these pictures now all over Asia, though they come from China originally, from the 12th century, Kaqwan in China. And they were a marriage, and still are a marriage, between Taoism, so you'll see a lot of nature imagery, and Buddhism. I also chose frames that are not particularly genderized because I think we need a modern approach to a lot of what's being discussed. So this first frame is the search for myself. The ox represents myself. And here the ox isn't even present. I don't even know myself. So one of the verses says, I cannot find myself. I only hear the locust churring through the forest at night. And that is the noise of ruminations in our mind. The Dhammapada, the earliest Buddhist scripture, uses a very contemporary term for such an ancient text of mind irritation. And this is the noise that we can't stop. And because this conference is on victimization and abuse, this is a process that we'll be discussing of healing. And it takes for granted that every day we have ups and downs in life that have to be reprocessed and thought about and reviewed, but also that many of us, as the conference has shown, suffer from deep trauma, not necessarily from religious or spiritual abuse. For example, I lived through 3 civil wars as a child in Lebanon, where our playground was bombed and machine gun bullets came through our apartment and we hid under the bed. So there are a lot of versions of trauma. And in this case, the ox herding pictures wouldn't be enough. One would have to seek professional help as well. So I don't want to in any way say that these are a solution to trauma. They're just a helpful way to lead us into the language of the interior world. The false ego is that which causes confusion and clinging habits of mind that we can't get away from. We can't really get away from. So there needs to be a decisive moment where we decide, I want to find a way out of this. How do I find a way out of my fears, my worries, and these repetitions of events that may not actually come through as events, but come through my reactions, my emotional reactions. In the second frame, I discover my footprints. And for many people, this is not the case. You could be 80 years old and still not have the footprints. So this has nothing to do with age. It has to do with a certain awareness. The commentary to the poetry says, I discriminate how will I perceive the true from the untrue? And I begin to discern the path. So only when I make the decision to go on this journey am I able to begin the path. In the third frame, I perceive myself. I see the ox. And the poetry reads, I hear the song of the nightingale. The sun is warm. The wind is mild. Willows are green along the shore. Here I cannot hide from myself. And this demonstrates the Taoist influence of the importance of being in nature. And I know this is true for myself, that there's something about being by the ocean. I'm in California, so going to the redwoods and you can be by the ocean at the same time can help you release a lot of those distractions of the mind. In the fourth frame, I finally see myself. I find myself. And I only seize myself, says the poetry, through a terrific struggle. Why is it a terrific struggle? The Hebrew scriptures, and I'll bring in different religions here and there because this would be true no matter one's religious background or if one didn't have any religious background. The Hebrew scriptures call this wrestling with God. Wrestling with God. And that is because normally I have an infatuation, and this is the commentary, an infatuation for scenery, which interferes with my direction. So these distractions are a trap from keeping me from my interior world. This was written and drawn and painted in 12th century agrarian China. And if you think of the kind of distractions they had then, which for us would be almost nothing, and now we have the internet, we have cell phones, and on a lot of us can jump on a bus or other forms of public transportation and be in another place. So it's very easy to have infatuation for scenery and forget about this interior work. And that's why it's a terrific struggle. It's a struggle because it takes a commitment. And here I'd be making a commitment. I often point to the discipline necessary in being a dancer or a pianist or becoming a doctor, that one needs to discipline oneself in technique. And here would be the technique of beginning to meditate. So beginning to be willing and make that commitment to be quiet, never repressing. Repression has nothing to do with this journey, but being able to begin to sit with whatever is going on in our minds. In the fifth frame, I begin to tame myself. And this is not my favorite frame because I have two black chow dogs, and they don't really look like this because it's kind of a sad look. And we want to keep a bit of that wildness in ourselves. So you wouldn't want to really see this particular expression in a horse, for example. It's not like you want to tame yourself into submission. That's not what this journey is about. It's that you're willing to become the one who looks at your own thoughts. And you're the one looking at your thoughts. You're not being led by the victimizations of the past or the daily round of, for example, collective, I would say, horrors like climate change and political situations that can be so overwhelming. We can't, our psyches can't handle them. So the poetry says, being well trained, I become naturally gentle with myself. And then unfettered, so here we're fettered, we're being led, but eventually you become unfettered, so the discipline becomes more natural, and you become the one who leads yourself. I didn't really know what this meant in graduate school when I was studying Asian tradition. And by the way, these particular ox herding pictures in all their multidimensional art forms are all over Asia. And now they're in the, around the world, but often not for their meaning. They're just used as a decoration, unless you're in a convent or monastery. But I didn't really know what this meant until I read Eric Fromm's book on the psychoanalysis of Zen Buddhism, where he describes the unconscious becoming conscious. And that's what's happening here. All that we've been holding within us, our memories and being able to analyze our dreams, begins to rise to the surface. So that top part of the iceberg, there are many schemas we can use, but this would be the top of the iceberg is our normal consciousness, which can hold quite a bit of trauma that comes out in very individual and often harmful ways, including our health through disease. And then going lower in that image of the iceberg, going under the surface into the unconscious, into dreams and memories. And finally, on the very bottom, in Buddhism, this is Mahayana Buddhism. So in Mahayana Buddhism, you have shunyata in Sanskrit, which is luminous emptiness. In the Western traditions, this would be the presence of God within oneself, or the Tao. And that's what you're trying to reach. You're trying to get to the point where you're bringing the presence into your everyday life. In the sixth frame, you are now able to have joy in your life. You're writing yourself in a way. You've come home, and the poetry says, slowly I return homeward. There's pulsating harmony, there's music, the great Buddhist word equanimity. So I see life with level. I level my experiences. It's not so much things are great or things are small. I see them equally, and I begin to find joy in everyday life. In John's Gospel, in Christianity, in the Last Supper discourse, there are a lot of words that describe home. So abiding within, dwelling, and this is that place within us where the noise begins to disappear in our heads. I'm not sure it ever goes away completely, but a lot of that noise clears out, and one is able to have this awe and wonder and joy in life. The seventh frame is I've transcended myself. And this is very Taoist, because we're in nature. So I reach home, I am serene, the ox too can rest, in blissful repose, I have abandoned the rope. And I've let go of technique. And you see this in artistry. when someone has studied a lot of technique. And again, that would be why it'd be so important to keep that spark of wildness. And now you break through and you're able to express yourself. At the same time, there's a Buddhist proverb that says, even the Buddha still meditates. So you would still need to do this every day, to sit in silence, to process what you're going through every day, because life has so many ups and downs. And then we come to the representation of shunyata, of luminous emptiness. And this you see all over the world in Mahayana Buddhist monasteries. It's a symbol of original innocence. And again, when I was in graduate school, I found this very abstract. And the idea of enlightenment, what is that? So I wanted to find a way to make it more practical. And one way to do this is to look at individual characteristics that grow from this experience. And if we were doing this as a workshop, what we would do is we would begin to list on a board childlike characteristics that personify the living of original innocence. And for example, I'll just give a few, there are many: unconditional love, trust, honesty, laughter, playfulness, joy, wonder. These would be the childlike characteristics. On the other side would be the childish characteristics that Ashley Montagu, the great anthropologist, called adultification. And adultification is a hardening of characteristics, just like can be hardening of the arteries as a physical process. There can be a hardening of our personality. And some examples of those would be prejudice, hatred. So these can be collective as well. We can look at these collectively as well. Prejudice that won't move, possessiveness, and a big one for our century and the late 20th century is cynicism. And not falling into cynicism, because that keeps us from being vulnerable. And that's an important part of original innocence. The commentary says, ignorance is gone, mind is clear of limitation, I seek no state of enlightenment. So the seeking has gone. And in Taoism, this is called effortless effort. And that's what you want. You don't want to strive. Again, there's no repression, there's no striving. You're trying to be in the present moment. In the ninth frame, I've reached the source, and the source can be translated as the Tao. In Buddhism, it'd be the Buddha nature. Dwelling in one's true abode, the poetry says, I am unconcerned with that without. I'm unconcerned with attachments. The river flows tranquilly on, and the flowers are red. In Buddhism, there's a term called the mirror mind. So when you can get to this place of clarity within, your mind can become like a mirror. Another image that used is a prism, where the color of light comes through the prism, and you're seeing life through these kinds of vivid colors. The great Muslim poet Rumi called the opposite of that smoke, when smoke covers our experience and we can't see reality, as the Sufis say, for the really real. The commentary reads, from the beginning, truth is clear, poised in silence, I observe the forms of integration and disintegration. One who is not attached to form need not be reformed. I'll read that again. One who is not attached to form need not be reformed. The water is emerald, the mountain is indigo, and I see that it which is creating and that which is destroying. And the term used in Buddhism is suchness. I see things such as they are. I don't put my interpretation on everything, which can be very wearing and exhausting. I am not pushing for anything, so I'm able to see things such as they are. And finally, in the last frame, one enters back into the world. This is called In the World. And this is typically a Mahayana Buddhist, because you have luminous emptiness and the Bodhisattva figure, a wisdom figure, who brings everyday life. And the poetry says, I use no magic. So there's nothing magical about this. It's everyday life. Barefooted and naked of breast, and this would be genderized as I'm reading it. I mingle with the people of the world. My clothes are ragged and dust laden, and I am ever blissful. So there's an element of social justice too, that this is not striving for the riches of the world. It has to do with the most basic forms of existence. I'd like to conclude with another poem that probably many of you are familiar with. Before enlightenment, I chopped wood and carried water. After enlightenment, I chopped wood and carried water. That's the poem, but I would like to add, what's the difference? And from the ox herding pictures, one would say the difference is my perception.
Sponsored by the Program for the Evolution of Spirituality.
Copyright 2023, President and Fellows of Harvard College.